Picture a Viking longhouse, but not one of warm hearths and epic sagas. This one is on the far edge of the known world, a place of perpetual shadow and biting cold. The air is thick, not with the smell of roasting meat, but with the hollow hunger of an endless winter. We've all heard the stories of Viking brutality, of their axes and their raids. But there is a line even they were not meant to cross, a final taboo that defied gods and men alike. What if, on the most isolated fringes of their world, a clan was pushed so far by starvation and despair that they crossed that line? What if they turned on each other, not just to survive, but to become something more monstrous? This is not a tale of warriors and glory. This is a story of a hidden horror, a secret whispered in the darkest sagas. This is the horrifying saga of the cannibal Viking clan, and the truth of it is far more chilling than any legend. Our journey begins in the 10th century on a remote, nameless island far to the northwest of Iceland. This island was not a land of rolling green hills, but a jagged scar on the ocean, a place of sheer, black cliffs and volcanic rock. The Vikings who settled it, a clan known only as the Skoldbekker, or the Shield Breakers, were an ambitious but isolated group. But their name became a bitter irony, for there were no shields to break and no battles to fight. There was only the brutal, relentless war against the cold and the hunger. The island was a graveyard. The soil was thin and frozen solid for most of the year, incapable of yielding a single crop. The few livestock they had brought from Iceland, a symbol of their pride and their connection to the wider world, were slowly starving to death. The animals' ribs began to show through their matted fur, their bleating becoming a haunting, sorrowful sound that echoed through the bleak valleys. The sea, once a source of life, had turned against them, its waters a churning wall of ice and storm that made fishing a lethal gamble. The longhouse, once a bastion of warmth and community, had become a tomb of hope. The people grew thin, their faces gaunt, and their eyes, once fiery with a warrior's resolve, now held a desperate, animal-like hunger. The children stopped playing, their laughter replaced by a haunting silence that was more terrifying than any storm. The Skoldbrekker were a people living on borrowed time, and as the endless winter deepened, the sacred laws of their world, the very foundation of their honor, began to fray. Every day was a question of whether the sun would ever return, and with each passing moon, the answer seemed to be a definitive and terrible no. The first act was not one of malice, but of raw, agonizing necessity. It began with the death of a young thrall, a slave who had succumbed to the cold and the gnawing emptiness of his stomach. The clan chieftain, a man named Rolf, saw not a body, but a resource. His mind, a battlefield of honor and survival, wrestled with a terrifying question. Was the death of one, an outsider, a lesser crime than the death of many, his own kin? The clan was wasting away, their children with sunken eyes, their women too weak to stand. The thrall was not a man in the eyes of the law, not truly. And in that frozen hellscape, the law of man was quickly being replaced by the law of the wolf. The act was carried out in secret, in the dark corners of the longhouse, away from the flickering light of the dying hearth. The clan's shaman, a woman of grim silence named Grima, performed a ritual to sever the soul from the body, a desperate attempt to honor the old ways, even as they broke the most fundamental of rules. The meat was boiled and consumed, not with relish, but with a quiet, hollow shame. Each mouthful was a taste of sin, a violation of a sacred code that had defined them for generations. It was a single, horrifying meal that kept the Skoldbrekker alive for a few more weeks. But in doing so, they had crossed a threshold for which there was no return. They had discovered a new, terrible source of food, and when the next person died, this time an old woman from their own clan, the decision was no longer whispered in the shadows. It was made in the open, with a grim and terrible purpose. They had eaten a piece of their own past, and in doing so, They had begun to eat their own future. The line between what was and was not a person had blurred, and the taste of survival, once so bitter, had become a horrifying addiction. Survival cannibalism is a desperate act, but for the Skuldbreaker, it was the first step on a descent into something far more monstrous. A dark, unholy ritual. As the hunger continued to gnaw at them, and as their numbers dwindled, the acts of cannibalism became less about survival and more about a terrifying new belief system. The shaman Grima claimed to have received a vision. She told the clan that the old gods had abandoned them. Odin had turned his back, and Thor's hammer was silent. But there was another power in the cosmos, a nameless, ancient entity that thrived on the breaking of taboos and the consumption of human flesh. She claimed this entity, this god of despair, demanded a tribute of human meat to keep the cold at bay. The clan, desperate and broken, began to believe her. Their shame was replaced by a twisted sense of piety. It became a perverted form of honor. When a warrior died, his body was not buried, but ritually consumed. The strongest parts, the heart and the muscles, were given to the chieftain. His skull was placed on the altar, a grotesque tribute to a nameless god. The saga speaks of a ritual known as the Managet, or Moon's Gaping Mouth, a terrifying rite where the clan would gather under the pale, cold moon to feast on their dead, believing that the act was a form of cosmic communion. They saw the moon not as Mani, the god of light, but as a vast, empty mouth, a mirror of their own endless hunger. The Skuldbreaker had become a cult of the damned, a clan of cannibals who saw their acts not as a sin, but as a twisted form of piety. Their humanity had been consumed along with their dead, and all that was left was a hunger that had no end. They had become something new, something terrifying, and something that was not meant to exist. This horrifying tale is not something you'll find in the mainstream sagas. It is a story that was deliberately scrubbed from the historical record, a dark secret that the Norse people themselves found too shameful and too terrifying to preserve. But if you know where to look, the whispers can still be heard. There is an obscure, fragmentary saga, a poem known as the Helheimar or Lay of the Realm of Hell. Most scholars write it off as a Christian-era fiction, a story meant to scare people with tales of pagan hells. But what if it's more than that? The poem speaks of a lost clan who drank from the skull of their kin and walked with the hollow hunger of the damned. It describes a chieftain whose hands dripped with the blood of his father, his heart, and whose eyes reflected the hunger of a god. It is a saga of madness and despair, of a clan that was swallowed not by the ice, but by its own dark hunger. It is a tale of a longhouse that became a tomb, of a people who were so isolated from the world of men that they began to live by the laws of their own monstrous god. The Helheimar is a terrifying literary artifact, a proof that the myth of the cannibal Viking clan wasn't just a story. It was a terrifying reality. It was almost lost to the ages, a chilling glimpse into the darkest corners of the human soul. For a story this dark, we can't just rely on whispers and legends. We need physical proof. In the early 2000s, an archaeological team began an excavation on that same remote, nameless island, following a loose, forgotten fragment of the Helheimar. What they found was a hauntingly silent landscape, a collection of half-buried turf longhouses, their roofs long since collapsed. The site was unremarkable until they began to dig. Beneath the frozen soil, the archaeologists found a burial mound, but it was not a traditional Norse one. It was a massive, chaotic pile of bones. And the bones told a story that was more horrifying than any saga. The bones were not from animals, but from human beings. The forensic analysis of the bones revealed a grim and terrible truth. They were covered in a series of cuts and marks that were consistent not with a battle, but with butchery. They found deep scratches from knives, clear signs that the flesh had been carefully removed from the bone. Some of the long bones, the femurs and humeri, had been deliberately broken open to get to the marrow inside. The bones of the chieftain, Rolf, were found at the very top of the pile, and they were the only ones that were whole. The evidence was undeniable. The Skuldbreaker, the Shieldbreakers, had not been defeated by an enemy. They had been consumed by themselves. Conclusion: the story of the cannibal Viking clan is not a myth. It is a terrifying reality, a window into a forgotten horror that was deliberately scrubbed from the historical record. Their story is a chilling reminder that the Viking world was not just a world of heroes and gods, but a world of brutal survival, of madness, and of a hunger that could turn a man into a monster. The Skuldbreaker were not evil by nature. They were a people pushed beyond all limits by a world that had forgotten them. They crossed a line to survive, and in doing so, they created a dark, unholy cult that was consumed not by the ice, but by their own desperate, insatiable hunger. Their story is a final, haunting whisper from the edge of the world. A reminder that the real monsters of Norse lore were not the ones in the myths, but the ones who were forced to become them. So what do you think? Were the Skuldbreaker a clan of evil monsters? Or were they a people who were driven to madness by an unforgiving world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more hidden horrors and forgotten sagas, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.